Bullish economic news out of Europe. Michael Ingram, market strategist at BGC Partners, joins me from London. Michael, good to see you. An interesting read on GDP in Spain. The economy there actually growing at its best level since the financial crisis. Are there opportunities for investors in Spain now?
Well, I think so. I mean, these are very punchy GDP numbers, 1% quarter-on-quarter, 3.1% year-on-year. And even if economic momentum seems to have peaked, it's clear that there's plenty of room for further appreciation in terms of the broader economy. I think so. I mean, I think if you wanted to focus on areas where it's perhaps not already reflected in the price, I think probably some of the Spanish banks are looking quite interesting. There is potentially a drag from their Latin American exposure, I think, at this point, because clearly some economies such as Brazil are struggling, as indeed are wider emerging markets. Perhaps some of the more domestically oriented SME exposed banks, probably areas to look at. And also the consumer is clearly leading this recovery in Spain. And I think there are a few names that we can probably sift through in the Spanish market as well. I'd have to say overall that even though we are seeing bullish macro news in Spain, though, that actually the earnings performance thus far in the broader market in Madrid has actually been quite disappointed, with earnings estimates being cut by something like 5% year to date on where they thought they were going to be at the start of the year. So yes, we can buy thematically some of these sectors on the back of the strength in the broader economy, but of course we have to see what's going on as well bottom up.
Beyond this news out of Spain, there's also word that Eurozone economic confidence rose rather unexpectedly to a 4-year high. So is some of that enthusiasm priced into other markets in Europe? And when you compare the various markets, which looks most interesting to you beyond Spain?
Well, I think the Eurozone consumer hasn't necessarily been a lead indicator on market performance. I think there has to be a certain amount of caution there. Of course, you'd have to say as well that there are some tailwinds which Eurozone economies and the consumer are feeling. Certainly a weak euro is helping, as is indeed a much lower oil price. And of course, some of this is going to drop out of the year-on-year comparison. But it does seem that, particularly compared to the US, the Eurozone consumer is much happier to spend some of the windfall gains from a lower oil price than perhaps the US counterparts have been. And in terms of market opportunities, well, I mean, yeah, a lot is being factored into the price. The market is banking on future growth. It's specifically banking on some convergence of operating margins between, say, the S&P 500 and the Euro stocks, because if you can make that comparison, EBIT margins are something like 35% lower in Europe than they are in the US. And I think the market's betting that, we are seeing something of a cyclical recovery. We are going to see that gap start to close, and earnings were going to grow on the back of it. As I've indicated earlier, there has actually been a little bit of disappointment in terms of delivery of EPS in Spain. And actually, if you looked across again Euro stocks as a whole, that's down about 2.5–3% year to date. So you've got these tailwinds, you've got the weaker euro, you've got cheaper oil, you've got a Eurozone economy which is growing faster than originally expected, and yet you're not really seeing this bottom up yet. And in that respect, the current earnings season is going to be fundamental in pushing European stocks higher in the second half of this year.
Quickly, Michael, what are your favorite sectors beyond the Spanish banks?
What you need to be focusing on is companies with operational, perhaps also financial gearing. Margin expansion rather than top-line growth is really what we're looking at. So we'll be looking at some of the industrial sectors, particularly some of the export-oriented companies, where you're really seeing that operating leverage, that cyclical pickup coming through. Yes, a lot of this has already been in the price, but there's also going to be some very interesting opportunities out there as well.
Michael Ingram, market strategist at BGC Partners. Thanks so much. I'm Rhonda Schaffler for The Street.